Hey, what's good, everybody? It's Darin here from McDonald Realty, and we are jumping right into what's going on with real estate prices, and everything you need to know for the areas of South Surrey and White Rock. Now, I want to make sure that you know when we're talking about this, we are using what's called the Home Price Index to talk about what's happening with prices. And the best way to think about the Home Price Index is it's kind of like inflation. Is inflation going up or going down? And we're not typically talking about a real house in these numbers. We're talking about what's considered the typical house. As an example, we call it a benchmark property where we're looking for homes with consistent features, or the idea of a home with consistent features. And we're watching how the value of that typical home kind of goes up or down, filtering out all the one-off sales that might skew the data. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we're going through these. The other thing I'm going to remind you as well is there's no such thing as a detached home in South Surrey and White Rock. Now, there is a detached home in Crescent Beach that is $1.5 million and in a range of prices that has certain features. So the reason I tell you that is it's really important not to paint things with a broad brush. We still need to consider micro markets type of properties, but this gives you a little bit of an idea of how things are actually performing, generally speaking. And there's some fascinating things we're going to talk about at the end of this video as well. So I want to make sure you hang around. We're going to talk a little bit about world events. We're going to talk a little bit about rates and some things you might want to consider whether you are buying or selling a home. So let's jump right into it here. Here's the most recent news release from the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. I highlighted a couple things in here because I think they're interesting for you. The Fraser Valley Real Estate Board recorded 843 sales for the month of February, the most recent stats that we're looking at, which was a 36% increase from the month prior, but 38% below the 10-year seasonal average. So we're still well below the 10-year average for sales, but up quite a bit month over month for the month of January, which was quite slow. We are in a very buyer-friendly environment right now, and you're going to see that as we go through the video. But the other kind of piece of that is overall inventory is well above the seasonal norm for the Fraser Valley. We had about 8,300 active listings, which is up 8% from January, but 51% above the seasonal average. So we've got just a massive amount of listings, generally speaking, throughout the Fraser Valley. Now, this graph right here, this shows you the benchmark value of all types of homes kind of thrown in a blender and spit out. The red line here is for the greater Vancouver market, and the blue line is for the Fraser Valley market. So the blue line is kind of North Delta all the way to Abbotsford. And you can just really see what has happened since about 2025 to prices, generally speaking, in these areas. So let's get a little more granular and into the South Surrey White Rock neighborhood now, where condominiums, this is the sales to active ratio I'm showing you right now. And that red line suggests what's called a balanced market condition. That means there's no advantage really to either party when the market conditions are kind of a certain amount of properties being removed from the market and new properties are coming to the market. It's kind of like a healthy market condition. And you can see we're just teetering below that. That red line usually represents about 15 to 20% sales to active ratio. So 20% would be 1 out of 5 homes selling, 15% would be about 1 out of 6. Anything lower than that means it's getting more and more challenged to do anything. So you can see we're just teetering on entering into that balanced market category. But since we've generally been below that or kind of in the balanced market territory, that has had an impact on prices over the course of 2025 and into 2026. So condominiums in the area of South Surrey and White Rock are down almost $6,000 month over month, and year over year they're down almost about $55,000. So clearly this is a market that is well into the advantage of a buyer. If it does continue to trend up as we saw month over month, that could certainly change. But as of right now, it is very favorable for the buyer. So a couple notes just about that. Activity is roughly at about an 18-month low, which is quite low. When you're trying to sell a house or buy a house, right? New projects are stalling. There's not a lot of new stuff necessarily coming to the market. There's a bunch of projects coming to the South Surrey White Rock market that are being held off on. And if you subscribe to this channel, you know all about them, or you follow us on our Instagram, you know all about them. But that said, a lot of them are just kind of pressing pause because they figure if they can't get rid of them, if they can't sell them right now for the prices they need, they're going to hold off on buying them. So it'd be fascinating to watch what happens in a year or two if those properties don't end up coming to the market, because where's all the new inventory, right, for all those buyers out there? We're going to talk a little bit about interest rates towards the end of the video, but there was a CIBC projection from their economy department that really said that they didn't expect the Bank of Canada to do anything with the overnight lending rate over the course of 2026. They figured it would stay right where it is. And a lot of people maybe are in a renting situation and going back and looking and saying, okay, well, if I had a bought a year ago, I've saved myself $55,000. And that certainly is true. A year ago, you would also have put a bunch of money down towards a mortgage and had 1 year off of your mortgage compared to starting to today. So I'm just really telling you that if you're out there waiting for rates to change, you might just kind of take that rental and how much you're paying on rent as an example. I don't know how much you paid in rent over the course of a year, but it was probably a lot as well. So take that all into account when you're kind of sitting on the sidelines waiting and watching to see what happens. If you're a seller, you are in an ultra competitive market still. So you need to be very competitive. And condominiums are all really kind of the same for the most part. I mean, you do get some in White Rock, South Surrey that have views and whatnot. Some that are a little more walkable and whatnot. But when you really get there and start walking through them, they all do kind of look the same for the most part. So you do need to be competitive when you're trying to sell those things. Now, let's talk about townhomes. You can see we've been in a balanced market for townhomes, and this has actually had an impact on pricing. So you can see we're floating kind of in around the 16% sales to active ratio, that 1 out of 5 to 1 out of 6 townhomes actually transacting. Again, this is a broad stroke. This isn't townhomes in Ocean Park. This isn't townhomes in Grandview. We're talking about townhomes throughout South Surrey and White Rock, generally speaking. But look at this. This is interesting. We've actually seen a bump up in prices in South Surrey and White Rock since the start of the year, which is very fascinating, right? So look at this, $2,300 up month over month. Now, year over year, you're down over $80,000 according to the home price index, but we saw it bump up month over month. So because we're in a balanced market, this market condition doesn't really have an advantage to anybody right now. The prices did go up according to the home price index month over month. So activity has decreased ever so slightly, but prices have improved month over month. Now, I always talk about townhomes being the missing middle, and this is one for investors to pay attention to, but also anybody maybe sitting on the sidelines. And here's the reason why. The millennial generation who's starting to get together, get married, have kids, and in fact, a lot of the millennials have kids that are, well into their, first couple of years of elementary school by this point. The missing middle is that perfect balance of affordability and space that they really need. And these complexes that they want to live in, these townhome complexes tend to end up in the more attractive areas. They're very walkable to elementary schools, amenities, all that sort of stuff. So this is the market to continue to watch. It's not super high priced detached homes. It's not 400 square foot investment condos that nobody ever wants to buy. This is the middle where you've got the space and the affordability. So I always am kind of just suggesting that you really pay attention to that market, because I do believe it's going to be the stronger of the markets continuously, as it's showing to be right now, because buyers crave the stuff that I'm talking about with that space and those amenities. Now let's talk about detached homes in the area. You can see detached homes continue to be one of the bigger struggling asset classes. And this isn't necessarily unique just to South Surrey or White Rock. This is happening all over the lower mainland in many areas. But you can see how far below a balanced market we actually, in fact, are well below. And that's going to have a big impact on prices, as it's had. So you can see what has happened to the detached home prices over the course of 2025. And in fact, there was a lot of decrease over 2024 as well. Month over month, they're down about $5,200. Year over year, they're down about $141,000. That is a big number. So it's fascinating to keep an eye on that and really to watch. Now, who's got the advantage in this market? Well, a buyer does. There's lots and lots of inventory, and they're very competitive. So what does that really mean? Well, put your offer out there. You deserve to get a good price for a home. That doesn't mean that you're going to take a big chunk off the asking price necessarily, but it does mean that you deserve to get really good value for your dollar. So what I mean by that is a well-priced home that should sell in and at what it's priced at. That is a good value. That means you got a good value. It doesn't mean that you're looking at an overpriced home where you have to negotiate it way down. Now that of course can happen as well, but you deserve to get really good value in this market. So look around for that. Put your offers out there. If you're a seller, there's lots of inventory for buyers to choose from, and hope is not a strategy. So if you feel that it's going to get better in the next month, as an example, well, that's hope. You can work with what you've got today, or you can just hope and pray that it does change and gets better. But when you look at something like this, where you recognize that over the course of 2 years, it has been a very difficult time for detached homes, the question you just have to ask yourself is, are we done? And only you can answer that. So everybody else is really just trying to guess using data, right? So that's a little bit about what's going on with that market. Now, I promise you I would touch on a couple things that I think are relevant for today's market. This graphic here that I'm showing you is from the British Columbia Real Estate Association. They were just really talking about mortgages and where they project mortgages would head this year. Now, the world moves quickly. As you know, in fact, as the day of filming this a week ago, there was not another war in the world started, which there is as of today. So who really knows, right? But if all things continue to kind of stay the same and whatnot, BC Real Estate, or BCREA, sorry, the British Columbia Real Estate Association, they don't think that there's going to be any changes to mortgage rates over the course of 2026, generally speaking. So variable rates, they don't think are going to change. Fixed rates, they don't think that they're going to change. Even the 5-year qualifying rate, they don't think is going to change ever really significantly. I mean, in fact, actually, they're showing no changes here. So that kind of matches up with that CIBC economics information that I presented to you earlier. So what are we really paying attention to when we're thinking about selling? When we're thinking about buying? What do we really have to consider? Well, the market drivers, number one is mortgage rates. We just covered that. Number two is economic shifts. So there's been some big changes since I filmed this last video for the people of South Surrey and White Rock that are fascinating to think about. We had a Supreme Court, I say we, it's not our country, but there was a Supreme Court ruling in the United States that the tariffs being imposed on Canada and other places all over the world were actually, in fact, illegal. Now, there was new tariffs that popped up shortly after that that were much less than the other ones that had been imposed. But really interesting to see the dynamic down there. You know, when you buy real estate is an investment, whether and any investment like certainty. So the more certainty that starts to come out, or maybe people just kind of get used to all the crazy that's going on, the better that is going to help the market. Now, I'm not saying that we have certainty necessarily yet, but that was a big, big announcement and a big change based on kind of what's been going on with the world order over the last year or so. We've also, as I mentioned, got a new war in the world. It's not the only one going on right now. And how much that'll affect BC real estate, I don't really think it will. But certainly there's lots going on in, in the economy, not just within Canada and whatnot. You know, BC, we've got our new provincial budget, which is pretty fascinating as well. So if you don't know about that and what's going on in that, you should give that a read, because there's certainly some things to pull apart in there, and maybe have a conversation with your local member of government. But I'll leave it at that. I don't want to get political on this. We know there's lots of demand out there for houses, so that those people are just sitting on the sidelines waiting, and just be careful you don't wait too long, because markets can change very quickly. Seasonal trends, we are going into one of the busier, typically, seasons of the year. And typically prices do tend to grow during that time. So we'll have to see if that trend continues. I would say the last 2 years that has bucked the trend. It hasn't necessarily been that way. But typically speaking, if you looked over the course of the last 20 years, the spring market is usually the most robust by all factors. And I don't really expect any local policy changes, because the market's been pretty sensitive the last 2 years. And I think our government and their reliance on the property transfer tax income, they're probably not going to poke the bear quite so much this year. So anyways, if you're interested in anything going on with BC real estate for when that sort of stuff happens, or anything going on with South Surrey, White Rock, Surrey, or any of the surrounding municipalities, you want to subscribe to this channel or follow us on Instagram. We have different content that we release on both to keep on top of it all. And if you're a buyer or a seller and you find yourself needing some help navigating the real estate market and want some grounded local advice that is really just designed to help you be successful, you can book a time to speak with me and my team in the description below this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next version of this in about a month or so. Take care.